Okay, good morning. We are starting Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Bamidbar, page 726, 727. So last week, on last Shabbos, we finished Sefer Vayikra, known as Torah's Kohanim, the book of Kohanim, because it describes all the laws of the Mishkan and what the Kohanim do in the Mishkan and various things related to that. We now jump to Bamidbar. Bamidbar means in the desert. Okay, this book was given in the desert. Rabbinically, it's called Sefer HaPekudim, the book of counting, and that's why in English it's known as the book of Numbers, because it starts off with counting the Jewish people, and towards the end there's another counting of the Jewish people. We're going to be reading these Parshas between now and just before Tisha B'Av. 2 weeks before Tisha B'Av. The week before Tisha B'Av, we always read Parsha Devarim, the first Parsha in the next book. In the 3 weeks, we read the last 2 or 3 of the Parshas. This year, we're the only Parshas that we combine, or Matos and Maseh, which is right at the end of Bamidbar. Most years we have lots of combined Parshas, and many of the Parshas in book of Bamidbar are combined depending on how the year falls out. As we've discussed a few times. So what I want to do is go through whole of Sefer Bamidbar in just a few minutes, and then come back to the Parsha and just discuss a few things in the Parsha, and then try and discuss a little bit about Yom Tov of Shavuos, which is in just a couple of weeks' time. Less than a couple of weeks now. Yes, less than a couple of weeks, a few days. Okay. So Bamidbar. Yadaber Hashem el Moshe Bamidbar Sina Ba'el Moed Ba'echad L'chodesh Hasheni B'shana Hashenis L'tzeis Eretz Yisrael Lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe Bamidbar Sinai, in the wilderness, in the desert of Sinai, Ba'el Moed, in the tent of meeting, Ba'echad L'chodesh, on the first of the month Hasheni, of the second month, B'shana Hashenis, of the second year, L'tzeis Eretz Yisrael, that they left Egypt, Lemor, saying. So this happened on Rosh Chodesh of the second month, being Iyar. We're just finishing Iyar this week. We're at the end of Iyar. So beginning of this month, the second year from when they went out of Egypt. So they're still sitting at Mount Sinai. And essentially, what Parshas Bamidbar is really the counting of the Jewish people, and starts then talking about the Levium, and we'll come back to that. And what the jobs of part of the Levium were. And then we go into, you don't have to page with me, but we go into Parshas Naso, which is almost always read the week after Shavuot. Occasionally it's read before, but it's generally the week after Shavuot. And Naso is the longest Parsha in the Torah, 176 verses. And as we've said before, the longest chapter of Tehillim is 176 verses, and the longest Gemara, the longest Masechta, is goes to page 176. There are 175 pages because every Gemara starts on page 2. Amud Beis, as we call it, page 2 is the first page, the last one is 176. So there is something spiritual and deep about all of that. Okay, Parshas Naso continues the discussion of the Levium and their jobs, and the families of the Levium, and then starts talking about some fascinating things, which, please God, we will talk about a little bit next week. The Soita, a married woman who appears to have done something wrong with a man. The husband warns her. She secludes herself with this man again. There were witnesses seeing that they were secluded, and she gets tested with drinking bitter waters in the temple. If she is guilty, she will literally explode, as will the man. As long as the husband himself wasn't guilty of anything. So there's a whole range of potential things that happen. If she's innocent, her and her husband will stay married and will be blessed with the most incredible children. How that happens, psychologically, whatever, not for now. It then goes, and the Torah goes over several pages describing the whole procedure that she goes through in the temple, where they actually erase Hashem's name. They write Hashem's name on a scroll, and Hashem's name is erased because it's such a terrible thing if people are not faithful to each other as husband and wife. Then it talks about the Parsha of the Nazir, the Nazarite. somebody who takes a vow where they will refrain from wine, eating grape products, cutting their hair, and coming in contact with the dead. It's said that a person who saw a soita in her disgrace should take on this vow of Nazirus. And it's about coming close to Hashem, that we should be closer to Hashem by refraining from certain things. The most famous Nazir in Tanakh was Shimshon, Samson. He was a Nazir from birth till death. Again, we will possibly come back to that. The Torah then discusses the priestly blessings, Birkat Kohanim, that we do. In Israel, it's done every day. In Sephardi shuls around the world, it's generally done every day. In Ashkenaz shuls, we only say Birkat Kohanim publicly on Yom Tov at Musaf. But in the Chazan's repetition, Shachris and Musaf, we do say, at least go say the words. The Chazan will say the words of Birkat Kohanim, but it's not a proper brocha, as the Kohanim don't get up and bless the people. We then, Parshas Naso then has a very long section on the first 12 days of the dedication of the Mishkan in the desert. Each of the leaders of the tribes brought an offering, and they all brought the same offerings, and that's what makes this Parsha so long, because it goes through word for word identical offerings that all 12 brought, and lists all of them, what they brought, and the total of everything they brought as presents from their tribes to the Mishkan, gifts to Hashem. Parshas Bahaloischa, the next one, starts off with discussing the menorah, and there's a whole discussion of why the menorah, lighting the menorah, is brought here, because Aaron was upset. He was the leader of the tribe of Levi, and he didn't get to bring an offering and a gift to Hashem in the Mishkan prior to that. They all thought about it. He wasn't Zoiche, he didn't merit to bring that an offering then. And Hashem said, no, you're going to light the menorah for all time. And even when we don't have a Mishkan, a Beis HaMikdash, and the menorah is not lit, we still have the mitzvah of Hanukkah, which came about through the Kohanim. And so that's the link between the Parshas. Then it talks about how the Levim were consecrated and how the work they did. And then it discusses, we're in the second year of exile, of the Exodus, and we need to bring the Korban Pesach. They brought the Korban Pesach, and as we discussed a few weeks ago for Pesach Sheni, there were people who couldn't bring a Korban Pesach, and Hashem gave us the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. And then we start discussing the travels. The Jewish people started traveling. We built Moshe made some trumpets, and
I thought you were getting involved with Trump.
no, we can get involved with Trump with pleasure. We'll leave politics out of it.
I also thought the same thing.
Yesterday I made a siyum on Mishnayos Kodshim, which is all about the offerings in the temple. And it ends with a Mishnah called Kinim. Kinim is literally nests. Talks about birds' nests and the bird offerings that are brought in the temple. Commentators say it's one of the hardest Masechtas. Very short, it's only 3 short chapters, but each Mishnah in there is quite long, and the very last Mishnah is extremely long, and it goes through a whole process with if a woman was about to have a baby and she said, if I have a baby boy, I'm going to bring voluntary bird offerings. And she also has to bring obligatory bird offerings, and so she brings 4 birds and gives it to Kohen, and there's a mix-up because the oiler offering is offered differently to the other offering that she brings. One's offered above the line, one below the line, whole story, and the Kohen wasn't sure, and they didn't discuss it, and they did it wrong. And the Mishnah goes through a whole series of steps. If it was done like this, then she has to bring 1 extra, and if it's done like this, she has to bring 2 extra, 3 extra, and it keeps going up. It then discusses how, just a brief line it's thrown in there, that if a ram has only got 1 voice when it's alive, it's got 7 voices when it's dead. The Mishnah says, well, how's this possible? Well, when it's alive, it says bad. The Mishnah doesn't say that. But when it's dead, we take the 2 horns and we can make shofars with it. And we take the limbs, the bones from a leg, and we can make trumpets from it. And we can take other parts of it, and each different part of it can be made into something that makes music in the temple. And then the Mishnah says, but it ends and says, by the way, when people age, and Amma Aretz age is a person who's not involved in anything with Yiddishkeit and doesn't learn Torah, nothing to do with it, when they age, their mind gets completely confused. And I just read Biden into that. It's not necessarily talking about other people, non-Jews, but so be it. I just look at this man and everything he says is confusion. You're talking about Trump.
So you're saying that Torah learning means
That's how it ends. It doesn't say not necessarily. Not necessarily. It doesn't prevent anything. I mean, there are many great Torah scholars who do get various sicknesses, but you just need to look at places like Bamidbar, Yerushalayim, places in Israel where there are more people in their 80s, 90s, 100s, 110s that are still sitting and learning Torah and being influential and fully awake, and that's alive and minds alive. It doesn't. These things don't apply to individuals. They apply to general. It's a thing similar to last week's parsha with the Toichecha, with the curses that were brought. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen if you learn Torah, then you will be protected. No, the generation will be protected. If there is something that comes down in general, some kind of decree against mankind or the Jewish people, whatever it might be that Hashem brings down, everybody might get sucked up, if I can use that term, into it. But Torah protects us. And we know Torah protects us in this world and the next world. So if we all jump on the bandwagon and start learning, then we'll all be protected, I think is more the message. But yeah, we talk about trumpets here, so just segue into that. Thank you for that.
We're all protected.
Absolutely, we've got, well, we got to learn.
Tuesday, Wednesday,
Yeah. Okay, we got to learn in order to do. Okay, then it talks about breaking camp, and we're now going to start going towards Israel. We're leaving Mount Sinai and we're walking towards Israel. Moshe, there's a little section in there that Moshe says to his father-in-law Yisro, who had joined the Jewish people in Parshas Yisro when we got this Torah. This question when he actually joined us in the camp, but Yisro, Moshe said, invites him to come with us to Israel, and he says no, he's got better work to do with other people, convert them and show them the way of Hashem, and he goes off on his way, and we start journeying, and then we complain as usual. We complain, we're not happy with the man, we want various things. Moshe gets upset with the Jewish people. Then they appoint a Sanhedrin, and Hashem responds to the people, and he gives them quail that basically says, you're going to eat this quail, this meat, until it comes out of your eyeballs. It's going to completely overindulge in food. Beautiful lesson in that we need to watch what we eat. And Rambam says, don't fill your stomach. Get to 3/4 full at most. Don't ever eat so much that you are completely full. Leave room for dessert and leave room after dessert. Rambam doesn't talk about dessert. Okay. And then Parshas Baloischa ends with Miriam talking Lashon Hora about Moshe. We will, please God, come to these in a few weeks' time. And she is quarantined for 7 days with tsaras, with the spiritual disease, whereby the person has to be quarantined outside the camp. And generally, Lashon Hora is one of the, if not the main cause of the spiritual disease, which we don't have today, called tzara. Somebody spoke Lashon Hora, and suddenly they got this lesion on their arm, or their hand, or their face, or their head, and they went to the Kohen, and the Kohen says, yep, that could be tzara, so check you out in 7 days' time, and they isolated, they had to move away from everything, from society, because they had spoken about other people. Okay, when we come to Parshas Shlach, we're now ready to go into Israel, and Hashem says to Moshe says to Hashem, we need to send spies, and the Jewish people want to check out the land we're going to Israel. Hashem says, Shlach lecha, send for yourself. You want to do this, you go and do it, but the consequences could be terrible, and unfortunately the consequences were, and we're still living with the consequences today. They go in, they spy the land. Yeshua and Caleb are positive. The other 10 spies come back with negative reports about the land. Again, some form of Lashon Hora about the land of Israel. Hashem orchestrated that the people in the land there'd be a number of people dying, great leaders would die at that time. And so everybody would be involved with funerals. And so the spies can then pretty much have freedom running around and seeing what the land is like. And they did see what it was like. They brought back most incredible fruit from the land of Israel. And their view of it was, well, look how ridiculously large this fruit is. And it's a land that kills its inhabitants because there were so many funerals going on. They didn't see the positive side of it. And so they come back, the people cry in their tents for no reason, and Hashem says, fine, you cried in your tents. Today, this day will be a day of crying for all time. And that day is Tisha B'Av, whereby we lost the first and second temple, Jews were expelled from Spain, the First World War started, which was the lead into the Holocaust, etc. Many, many calamities happened on the 9th of Av to the Jewish people through history. The first calamity that happened was those people who cried for the next 38 years died every year on Tisha B'Av, and they would dig their own graves, and some would wake up in the morning and some wouldn't. And they came to the 40th year and they dug their graves. Remember, Tisha B'Av's the 9th of the month. The new moon was 9 days before that. The moon is getting fuller and fuller. And on that year, nobody died. So they all thought, oh, we maybe got Rosh Chodesh wrong. Dug their graves again and nobody died. Until they realized it's full moon on the 15th. Okay, we are now the people who are going to go into the land of Israel. And Hashem forgives the people, and they give 40 years of wandering in the desert because of, or 38 years, they've been 2 years already, where Hashem says, no, that's it. It's too late. You punished for crying for no reason and for this terrible report about the land of Israel. But then straight away Hashem says, oh, by the way, there is a mitzvah of bringing libations, of bringing, part of the service in the Mishkan and in the temple is pouring libations of wine every day and water on Sukkot. On Sukkot, there's the whole service of pouring of water because we're blessed with water on Sukkot, which is the time when we start thinking about rainfall. Eretz Yisrael being a winter rainfall, we're going into winter in Sukkot, and so that's we start davening, and Hashem blesses us with rainfall at that time of year. The mitzvah of challah, which is the portion taken and given to a kohen, is given at that point in time. As we said before, what we call challah is just a reminder that we need to take challah when we make a dough of a certain size, and in our times we don't give it to the kohen, we can't eat that. That part of it is eaten in purity, we are not pure. But we take it off as a reminder that we need to, at some point in time, give challah to the kohen when we can be purified. The mitzvah of, that talks about that this person who desecrated Shabbos in the desert, what happened to him, tzitzis, and the mitzvah of tzitzis is then brought here, which is the third part of the Shema that we say in Shema, and that's the end of Parshas Shlach. Then we have stories of things that happened in the desert. The first one being Parshas Korach, where Korach, being a cousin of Moshe, was not happy that Moshe was the leader of the Jewish people. Aaron was the Kohen Gadol, and Korach, the cousin, didn't get any major role. He wanted to be everything. And he has this whole dispute with Moshe and Aaron. And it says that what's a dispute that's L'Shem Shemayim versus what's a dispute that's not Shem Shemayim in the name of heaven. Korach dispute, and the way the Mishnah describes it is Korach and his henchmen had the dispute. It wasn't Korach and Moshe, because Korach found 250 leaders of the tribe of Reuven and got them together to go and approach Moshe and a few others, Dasan and Aviram as well. And Moshe wasn't disputing Korach at all. Moshe said, listen, Hashem put us in charge, and let's bring your pans tomorrow. And all 250 of them brought pans to offer something in the Mishkan, but all of them died because each of them felt in their way they should be the leader. So it was Korach and his guys that were disputing things, not Korach and Moshe. Moshe stood back. That's all Hashem. And the earth opened up, and Korach and his henchmen and his family and the like were swallowed up into the earth, and all his possessions, everything. Korach's sons were able to do tshuva, and they clung on, and they were able to climb out of the hole, and they became leaders in the Jewish people. And some of our Tehillim that we say are the sons of Korach, B'nai Korach, in their name. And then the people come along and they say, well, hang on, how do we know that Aaron's really the leader? And so they do another test, and each leader of the tribe takes their staff, and it's put into the Mishkan overnight, and the next morning Aaron's staff is blossomed with flowers and with almonds, and the others weren't. And another proof that Aaron is the Kohen Gadol. But people still scared, but they keep going on. Then it talks about gifts to Kohanim. Kohanim get certain gifts, animal offerings. Any animal that's shechted today, there's certain parts of it are given to the Kohen. Butchers work it in different ways. Some of them will give it to a Kohen who will sell it back. It doesn't have that same level of holiness as something like challah or truma, but it's a gift that's given to a Kohen. Gifts to Leviim, tithing things are then discussed. Then we get into Parshas Chukas, a choik being a mitzvah we don't understand, and the ultimate choik is the red heifer, whereby this red cow comes along and cleans up impurities. So somebody's become what we call tamei meis, impure from a dead person, gets purified on the third and seventh day with the ashes sprinkled in water, sprinkled over them. That person becomes purified, but anybody involved with the preparing or sprinkling of the ashes of this red heifer becomes impure. A lower level of impurity is just for a day, and King Solomon said that's the one mitzvah he did not understand, the wisest of all men. There's certain mitzvahs called chukim, which are there because Hashem told us that's the mitzvah. And at the end of the day, every mitzvah is a choik, meaning that every mitzvah Hashem gave us, not for us to understand. It came from Hashem and we do it. Some of them we can understand logically, some of them we can understand historically, and some of them we can't understand. But they're all mitzvahs from Hashem. So to some degree, they all fit into the category of being a choik. But the Torah talks about Parshas Chukas and the whole story with the red heifer. Then we suddenly jump. And in the middle of Parshas Chukas, it says that Miriam died. When did Miriam die? Just before we were going into Israel, in the month of the first month, the people were in Kadesh, in the month of Nisan, in the 40th year, Miriam died. And then she's buried, and they assemble, and then they quarrel again, because they now quarrel about water. There's no water, because it's brought down here that the well of water that came from the rock in the desert was the well of Miriam. In Miriam's merit, we had water. And the whole story about Moshe and Aaron then go to the rock, and then they're not sure, they're trying to find which rock to speak to. Hashem says, speak to rock. When they first got water, Hashem said to Moshe, strike the rock. So Moshe then strikes the rock, and Hashem said, no, I didn't tell you to strike the rock now, and therefore Moshe and Aaron are punished that they will not go into the land of Israel. Even though they could have gone into Israel, they possibly should have. They were part of that generation of the spies. They were not obviously involved in the story of the spies, but Hashem decreed at this point in time, Moshe is not going to go in. Okay, and then
Is it not a harsh?
it's every person is judged at their level. So Moshe was at a level that he spoke face to face, whatever that means to Hashem. So he is judged at Moshe Rabbeinu's level. Would you or I be judged at Moshe's level? No. So each of us is judged where we are and where we should be in our own lives. So when we see that in the Torah, it's brought, the Torah is, for want of a better term, an open book. The other religions will not have in their book that their leaders did sins. Their leaders are above reproach. We know how terrible many of them were, but the Torah puts it out in black and white, the things that our leaders did and the punishment they got for it. But it puts it in a way on our level. It says that Reuven slept with his father's wife. Reuven did not sleep with Yaakov, his father's wife, one of the 4 wives. Reuven moved his father's bed to his mother's tent because he felt after Rachel had died, he felt that his mother, Leah, should be the primary wife. Yaakov had said, no, Bilhah is going to be the primary wife. And Reuven was offended by this because his mother was the first one that he married. Bilhah and Zilpah were the maids of his mother and his aunt. And so he moved his father's bed into his mother's tent to show his dissatisfaction with that. The Torah says Reuven slept with his father's wife because at his level, it was as if he had done that. And there are many stories in Torah like that. We learn that on Shavuos we got 2 Torahs. In last week's Parshas it says Hashem gave us 2 Torahs. What does it mean 2 Torahs? A written Torah. These 5 books of the Torah, the Chumash, and the oral Torah. We cannot live with just the written Torah. We need the explanations and the stories behind it. So the Torah says one thing and the commentators come along and explain to us what that actually means. And that goes with every single thing in Torah. We can't understand directly just by reading the words. There's a common misconception. A lot of people say, where does it say that in the Torah? You hear that often from people who are a little bit more cynical. It says it in the Torah in what was handed down on Mount Sinai, being the Torah and the written Torah and the oral Torah, the explanations of how we understand the stories and the mitzvahs in the Torah. And so we need both. The other thing that we need to understand is we've got a Gemara. The Gemara and the Mishnah and the Talmud, in the Gemara, in the making up the Talmud, becomes what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. The oral Torah is not, it comes along and says, Abaya said this and Rava said this, and they have this argument and discussion about this, or Hillel and Shammai have a discussion, or whomever it was. What that is the rabbis in the yeshivas, in their places of learning at the time, were discussing how do we interpret and understand the verses in the Torah to apply to us in all times. And so Moshe on Sinai wasn't told, Abaya said this, and Rava said this, and Rabbi Akiva said this, and this one said that. Moshe was told, these are the laws of the Torah. And these are the tools that Hashem gave us to explain, extrapolate, understand how those verses apply. And what the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Gemara are doing is explaining and extrapolating all those laws. They happened to get to a stage in life where we couldn't hand it over orally anymore. The destruction of the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. And over the next few years, the Roman persecution was getting so bad and so many people were killed that the rabbis needed to write it down. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came along and wrote down the Mishnah. But you can't just learn Mishnah and understand exactly what the halacha is. So then over the next few hundred years, the Gemara was written down. The Gemara is an expansion, an explanation of the Mishnah. And again, we can't learn laws directly from Gemara. We understand and we apply it, but then we need the Rishonim, essentially the Rambam, the Rosh, the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, and later authorities to explain to us what the halacha is out of the Gemara. So a rabbi today who will get a difficult question and try and understand it from various sources will go back through sources who have gone through each of the earliest authorities to work out what the particular halacha is. In our time, there have been very few rabbis. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was one of them who could go straight to the Gemara and tell you what the halacha was because he knew everything in between. But most rabbis go through that process and quote various sources to explain how we get to what a specific halacha is in our times. How do we understand, can I turn on something on Shabbos, electricity? How does LED apply versus an incandescent bulb? And in order to do that, we need the basic tools to explain all of that. And that's what was handed down. All right, we get to the point now in Parshas Chukas, and then dear old friend, quote unquote, Amalek attacks us again for the second time. He'd attacked us soon after we came out of Egypt. Whenever there was discourse and dispute and we were at a low level, Amalek attacks us. I just left out one little thing. Just prior to that, Aaron dies. Just before we're going into Israel, Aaron dies now. And then Amalek attacks us, and then we have a war, and one of the songs that we sing, there's 10 songs that are sung through the Torah, through Chumash, through Tanakh, and one of the 10 songs is brought here. It's a very short song, but very, very deep. Then we battle Sichon and Og, these two giants, and they are wiped out. And then we get to the next Parsha, Parshas Balak. And Balak was a king who employed Bilam, who was the prophet of the non-Jewish world, just like we had Moshe Rabbeinu, who was our prophet, the greatest prophet connected to Hashem, that we learned things Hashem taught Moshe, who taught us. Bilam was given to the nations of the world to be a prophet to them. Unfortunately, he generally stood on the wrong side of the fence in terms of what he taught people. But Balak employed him to come and curse the Jewish people, and he came along and tried to curse the Jewish people. The whole story with the talking donkey. His donkey starts talking to him, and a whole story about how it's just bizarre, the discussion between this donkey and him. He wasn't even surprised the donkey was talking to him. But the donkey speaks to him. He goes along to try and curse the Jewish people, and each time he tries to curse us, his words flip into blessings. And the most famous one of his blessings is, I think it's his third blessing, he uses the phrase, Ma tov o'alecha Yisrael. How goodly, they translate, are your tents in Klal Yisrael. He's looking down at this encampment of the Jewish people, and he sees that the windows and the doors of the tents don't face each other. They face opposite directions, each tent. So don't look into your neighbor's things. The lesson from that is we should not be looking into what Yenem has got, what other people have got. What I've got was given to me from Hashem, it's mine. I actually heard yesterday, on Friday, if you just look back throughout history, pretty much from the sin of Cain and Hevel, of Cain and Abel, through all of history, most of our problems result from jealousy. Looking at what other people have got and thinking, well, I should have that too. No, Hashem's given me what I need for myself, and I need to work with that. And Pekah Avos says, who is a wealthy person? Who is rich? Somebody who is happy with his own lot in life. That's where you get happiness. When I start looking, X has got this and Y has got that, and why don't I? And it causes major, major problems. And so that's Parshas Balak with Bilam blessing us 3 times. Bilam basically then comes up with a thing. He says, look, I obviously can't curse these people. There's a way of getting to them, and that's through immorality. And so let's entice some of the Jewish men to behave badly, which goes the end of Parshas Balak into Parshas Pinchas. Pinchas comes along and he sees the Zimri, one of the leaders of Shimon, has found himself this non-Jewish Midianite woman, and he publicly says, well, what's wrong with me taking a Midianite woman? Publicly sleeps with her, and Pinchas goes and kills them both with one spear. Pinchas, being a son of Elazar, being a son of Aaron HaKohen, was not a Kohen, because the Kohanim originally were Aaron and his 4 sons, and any children born after that point in time. Pinchas was born before that, so he wasn't elevated as a Kohen initially. Hashem gives him what's called Brisi Shalom, the blessing of the covenant of peace, and he becomes a Kohen. And it says that Pinchas lived for a very, very, very long time, and Pinchas is Eliyahu Hanavi, who will herald in Mashiach. Whether it's him himself, whether he died and became Eliyahu, it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come and bring in and herald in time of Mashiach. Eliyahu Hanavi is the one prophet that we know who comes to every bris milah, who comes to every Pesach Seder, who is there for us when we need help. Okay. And then we have a new counting. We count the Jewish people again. Hashem says, take a census of the Jewish people. Hashem el Moshe ve'el Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, because Aaron had died already. Le'mosu es rosh kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Count the Jewish people. Lift up the heads, literally, of the Jewish people and count them. Okay, and we count the Jewish people again. That goes through the whole thing, and the count comes out at 601,730 people. We then
Only count the men, Gary.
count the men between the ages of 20 and 60. Those people who are fit to go out to war. We'll come back to that in this week's Parsha in a few minutes, hopefully. Then the Levim are counted separately. How do we count the 12 tribes and the Levim? Because the 12 tribes were the 12 sons of Yaakov. But Yosef was promised that his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, will be tribes like the other tribes. And so sometimes the tribes are counted as the 12 sons, including Levi, and sometimes Yosef is counted as two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, and Levi is separate. And in these cases, when we're counting, Levi is separated, so we count Levi separately. And then we have the first case of feminists in history. Slofchad's 5 daughters, we're told to inherit things, and Slofchad was one of the leaders of the tribe of of Manasseh, the family of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, and he had died and left only daughters. And they were concerned that tribal inheritance is going through the sons, but we're only 5 daughters. What's going to happen to us and our father's portion? In Israel, it's a double portion because he was the firstborn. And so what's going to happen to that? And Moshe says, oh, this is one of those laws I don't quite know. I've got to go back to Hashem. And Hashem says, no, it can go to the daughters. In that first case, they needed to marry people of their tribe in order to keep it in the tribe. But after that, with Yovel and things do revert back to the tribes. But those 5 daughters, and they mentioned several times between here and the end of the book of Bamidbar. Moshe is then, he knows he's not going to land, and Hashem shows him the entire land of Israel and the entire history of the Jewish people. Moshe then asks for a successor. He's hoping one of his sons can be, but Yoshua, his faithful servant, his prized student, becomes the leader. And it says that Yoshua was made the leader because Yoshua was that person who was first up in the morning setting up the chairs for everybody to come and learn from Moshe, and he was the one who tidied up at night. Most important job in a shul is the person who picks up the tissue on the floor, wipes off the dust of something. The person who gets involved in cleaning up for Klal Yisrael is the person who's elevated, because that's a job that's thankless. Nobody wants to do it, but the person who does it is obviously doing it for no glory, but for Hashem himself.
So you do the tables once.
That's part of the job. Okay, and then we're told the end of Parshas Pinchas is all the Musaf offerings. So it's firstly, we're told the daily Tamid offering. We're about to go into Israel now. We need to know what the offerings we bring. The daily Tamid in the morning and the afternoon, and then Shabbos Musaf, Rosh Chodesh, and all the Yomim Tovim Musaf. Parshas Pinchas is the most read Parsha in the year. We read it more times than any other because we read it every month on Rosh Chodesh. We read the part about Rosh Chodesh. We read it every Yom Tov as the Musaf reading. And so, given that we have approximately 18 days of Rosh Chodesh, because 1 month is 1 day, next month is 2 days, it being the 29 and a half days, we read this 18 times a year, plus all of the Yomim Tovim, far more than any other Parsha we read Parshas Pinchas. Just as an aside, 2 of my kids are named in this week's Parsha because second names. Because Ori's second name is Pinchas and Tali's second name is Noah, Noah being one of the 5 daughters of Slokad. So, and that ends Parshas Pinchas, and then the final 2 Parshas, which this year again is going to be a double Parsha, Matos and Maseh. Matos starts off about vows and oaths. It discusses then the battles against Midian and how we were sent out to go into land and people attacked us and we needed to get through their land to go and get into Israel. And then how we divided the spoils between the soldiers and the other people and who's got a share in all of that. And then now we've got this whole area, what we could call today Transjordan, the east bank of the Jordan. And 2 of the tribes, Reuven and Gad, come along and they say, we think this land is better for us. We've got so much cattle and so many flocks of sheep that we need all this extra land. We would like to stay on this side of the Jordan. And Moshe says, not quite, we're getting that land. And they said, no, don't worry. we'll build pens for our animals and we'll build cities for our people and we will come and help the Jewish people. And Moshe said, you got a bit wrong there. Look after your people before you look after your animals. Something that I think is crept into society in some parts in our time. Animals are now more important than people. Trees are more important than people in many cases, sadly. They clarify it. Moshe puts a condition on them that they will cross over and come and fight with the Jewish people, and they will be across the Jordan. But Moshe says no, he'll also put part of, we call it Chatzi Menashe, half of the tribe of Menashe on that side of the Jordan. Part of Menashe is on the east side and part on the west side. In order to keep a connection between Reuben Reuben and Gad, and the rest of the Jewish people, Menashe was split between the two parts so that we had this flow of people. And then Parshas Maseh, the final Parsha, is the journey, is the 40 years in the desert. Where did we go? Most of our journeys were very short journeys, and in some places we stayed for 19 years in one place in that 40 years. So it wasn't like we were that terrible term wandering Jews. We were actually lived in encampments in various places, and the Parsha goes through the various different encampments that we had, which we will discuss in more detail in several weeks' time. The Torah then describes the boundaries of the land of Israel, and where the Jewish people, what becomes holy in terms of Eretz Israel. Interestingly enough, today the modern country of Israel includes a city called Eilat. Eilat was never in the boundaries of biblical Israel, and therefore many people who live in Eilat today, religious people, will keep 2 days Yom Tov. Not everybody does, but people will keep 2 days Yom Tov because it wasn't in the sanctified part of the land of Israel. Then we talk about the leadership, Yeshua going to be the leaders and who the leaders of the tribes are, and the setting aside of the 42, initially the 6 cities for the Levim and 42 cities whereby if a person inadvertently killed somebody else, they would run there as known as cities of refuge. And the Torah goes to town on that. Then discusses again the daughters of Slachad and tribal intermarriage, how it is allowed and how it all works. And for at least the third time, the Torah mentions the names of the daughters of Slachad, and that ends Parshas Sefer Bamidbar with the end of Parshas Maseh. Right, that was a quick review of the whole Sefer of Bamidbar. Yes, well, that's good. It was only 40 minutes.
Yeah, it says the test in 5 minutes. Are you going to pass? No.
Okay, let's go back to this week's Parsha and just briefly go through a few things in the Parsha. We are on page 727. As I said, Bamidbar, in the desert. And we call this book in English Numbers, which comes from what the rabbis call it Hapakudim, Sefer, put in the book of countings, because of the 2 countings of the Jewish people. Now, it's introduced by how do we count Jewish people? Verse 2, Su es rosh kol adas b'nei Israel, mishpachoisam, veis avoisam b'mispa shemos, kol zacha gilosam, liben esrim shana v'mala, kol yotzei tzava b'Israel, tifkedu oisam, litzivasam oisa, asa v'aron. Okay, this is going to answer the question about what age people were counted. At this point in time, it's slightly different ages are mentioned, but Su es rosh kol adas b'nei Israel. Lift up the heads of all the children of Israel. And they translate it here as take a census of the entire assembly. But when we take a census of people, we lift up their heads. Each person counts. Each person's head who is counted is counted. We count people. Why do we count people here? Why the Torah, at least, there's 3 times where we counted in the Torah. David HaMelech counted, little spider here. Off you go. King David counted the Jewish people and he was chastised for counting people. We don't actually count people, we count coins. Each person donates a coin and we count the coins. When we're looking for a minyan, we don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We use a pasuk, 10 words. Sfardim, when they count people, they say the bracha of Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which is the only bracha on food that we have that's 10 words in it. That's how we count. So we'll go around. Hoshea es amecha, Baruch es nachlasecha. If we get to the end of the pasuk, that's 10, then we know we've got a minyan. We don't count Jewish people. It's not so. There are people who will say, not one, not two, not... I don't know how that works, but they do it. The other people will say like, 1 kippah, 2 kippot, 3 kippot. They're not counting people. The point is we don't like to count people. One of my teachers always used to say the RACV used to have an advert, you remember not a number. Every single Jewish person is a member of Klal Yisrael. We're not numbered. We don't count as numbers. We count as individuals. Every one of us has got our part to play in Hashem's master plan. Each of us got our own little part to play. And that whole jigsaw puzzle is how we will get Mashiach. When we all play our little part, the hard part of it is we don't all know. None of us really know what our part is, but we need to try our best to figure out how we can connect to Hashem, and that's our part in the whole process. Okay, so, and who is counted? Everybody, every male over the age of 20, according to the head count. Again, raise their heads. From 20 years of age up, everyone who goes out to battle for the Jewish people. Anybody who's eligible to be a soldier in Klal Yisrael is counted in these things. And partly reason being, that's why the Levim are not counted. Because the Levim had their separate job, which was twofold. One is working in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, and 2 is teaching the Jewish people. Those people who are learning Torah full-time, who are teaching Torah, are exempt from army service. Dispute going on in the land of Israel right now, that this is the source of it. And originally it was put in place, the Chazon Ish, amongst others, the leading rabbi of the time, sat down with Ben Gurion and negotiated that those people who are in full-time learning are exempt from national service. That was in the late 1940s, when they were setting up the rules of how the land of Israel is going to work. There were a few hundred people in full-time learning at that point in time. Today we have many, many more. The Chazon Ish and many of the rabbis at the time said, you just look at pre-war Europe, how many phenomenally great rabbis and yeshivas and kollels there were through. Every shtetl had an incredible amount of learning going on. The learning was immense. The rabbis that we had at the time, most of whom, unfortunately, were either died before the Holocaust or, unfortunately, Europe was wiped out. And the Chazon Ish said, it's going to take us a generation to rebuild that Torah. And so his view was, let's rebuild Torah by keeping people studying full-time. A generation, a lifetime is 70 years. And we need at least 70 years to rebuild Torah to get it to a point where could it ever be where it was pre-war Europe? That's a good question. But it's at a point now where there's more people learning Torah than ever before, whether it's full-time, part-time, whatever it is. What is happening is now it's becoming this political discussion. That 70 years is up a few years ago. We have a generation of learning Torah. In order for the Jewish people to survive, there always needs to be people learning full-time. Does it have to be every single person? That is the political discussion. In the Haredi world, it's become a stigma if you're not learning full-time. But it's not for every single person to be able to learn full-time. And so you've got people who are learning, in quotes, where they're not really fit to be learning, and they should be doing some form of national service potentially. It's not a political discussion. I'm not here to take sides at all. But there needs to be an understanding on both sides of the argument. In order for a Jewish state to survive, a Jewish state has to have people learning Torah. Torah is what keeps us, and the wars that we discussed in Sefer Bamidbar show us that we have 3 types of soldiers. We have the soldiers fighting on the front line. We have soldiers providing them with what they need in terms of ammunition, in terms of food, in terms of logistics, in terms of espionage, in terms of information. Those people, you need all those people in the middle, and then you need people sitting and learning Torah and connecting to Hashem. And if you've got all three, then the Jewish world survives. If you've only got one or two of those three, the Jewish world does not survive. Israel doesn't exist, and we need to have all three. And when we get to that point of understanding, then we know that Moshiach will come. Right now, there's this discussion going on. Unfortunately, there's some little wounds that are being reopened from pre-October 7 with demonstrations going on both extremes. We need to get that middle ground needs to be made much bigger, better understanding of each other and each of our needs, and then we will survive. But what has been happening in the Haredi world over the last few years is many, many more people are going out and getting degrees and starting to, particularly in the high-tech industry, computer programming and that side of things. Many, many Haredim are starting to work in those areas in the world right now. We need to encourage that. Some have, yeah, no, it's definitely happening, but it needs to be a blend of things. Yeah, we need to find, and that's the hardest part of all of it. Okay, we count all the Jewish people. I'm not going to go through it, but it lists all the counting. It counts every single tribe. I'll just pick one, for example, Reuven, the firstborn. And it lists it in very much similar words. Vahiu b'nei Reuven b'chor Israel. These are the sons of Reuven, the firstborn of Israel. Toldasam nishpoischam, according to their families, their father's household. Leveis avoisam, their father's household. B'mispar shemus legulosam, by the number of names according to their head count. Every single Jewish person is named. We are named. We are named. Each person is named. Moshe went through and named everyone. Kol zechar ben esrim shana v'mala, that were 20 years of age and up. Kol yotzei tzava, who all go into the army. Pukudam lemate Reuven, this is the counting of the tribe of Reuven. Shisha v'arim elef chamesh ma'os, 46,500. That's Reuven. And then we can go to Shimon. And Shimon, same words, comes out 59,300. Go through all of them. We get to the end of the counting on page 730, 731, towards the bottom of the page, verse 44 to 46. These are the countings of Moses and Aaron, the leaders of Israel. They counted 12 men, one man for his father's household were they. In other words, all the leaders, all 12 leaders plus Moshe and Aaron counted. These were the counting of the children of Israel according to their father's household from 20 years of age and up. Everyone who goes out to the Legion of Israel, all the countings, 603,550. Almost an identical number, the 601,000, I think it was 370, that we had in Parshas Bamidbar. This is a consistent number, 600,000 or thereabouts people in the Jewish people, men of those ages. If we extrapolate it out on normal family type basis, we usually say there's about 3 million Jewish people in the desert. That's usually our numbers that we quote. If you've got 600,000 men of these ages, you've obviously got men that are younger, men that are older than 60. There's a question if this is men from 20 and up, because it says that only here, whereas later it says 20 to 60. So there's a question, do we count people 60 and above in this, because they don't generally go to the army, or do we? But that's not that beyond the scope of this, but just to know that there were people, men younger, and boys younger than 20, older than 60, take double that, let's just say, to get to the women, and we get about to 3 million people.
In 3 million, would it be men, women, children?
Yep. Yeah, from birth through to 120. Okay, then the Parsha then talks about how the Jewish people camped. We had, the tribes were camped together in 4 encampments. You had the Mishkan and the Machane Levia, it's known as the camp of the Leviim, in the middle. And then you had 4 encampments around it, 3 tribes in each camp around it. You had 1 leading tribe and 2 others. So it says, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron on page 732, 733 at Shlishi. Children of Israel should encamp each man by his banner. We had what we call a a nace. A nace is a banner, and a nace is also a miracle. And so we look up to the banners of these people, to the miracles that Hashem causes for us. And we camped. So these camped in the front, in the east, Yehuda, and its leader Nachshon ben Aminadav, and it counts them again. There were 74,600. Camped with them was Yisachar, the leader of Yisachar. His number was 54,400, and Zvulun, whose leader was Eliav ben Chelon, and they were 57,000. All these counted, the camp of Yehuda counted together, were 186,400, and they were the first to journey. Then we go over the page, the campment of Reuven, included with Reuven with his leader, Elitzur ben Shadur, was Shimon with his leader, etc., and Gad. And that camping was 151,000, and they were the second to journey. Then there was a tent in the middle. Talks about the tent in the middle, and then we have the campment of Ephraim. To the west, Ephraim, his leader was Elishama ben Amichud, and together with Ephraim was Menashe and Binyamin, and they were 108,100 counted. And finally, the campment of Dan to the north, Achiezer ben Amishadai, they're counting together with Asher and Naphtali and their leaders, and they were counted as 157,600. And then the total of children of Israel were, again, it mentioned 603,550. That's a total. The Levites were not counted amongst the Jewish people. Hashem commanded us to be counted. The children of Israel did everything that Hashem had commanded. So they encamped in their banners. They all had flags. It discusses the different colors of the flags. Each tribe had a different coloring. And so this is the source for an army going out to battle with their regimental flags and their specific banners that they all had. This is where this all comes from. The Jewish people were moving like an army, but in a very regimented way. That's the word regiment comes from. And then it discusses Moshe and Aaron, the appointment of the Leviim, and the counting of the Leviim. Basically, on page 738, 739, Hashem's Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lemo, in the middle of the page, Vani hine lakachti es halavim mitoch b'nei Yisrael tachas kol b'chol rechem b'nei Yisrael v'ayu li levim halavim. Hashem says to Moshe, I've taken the Leviim, and I'm putting the Leviim in place of the firstborn. The firstborn should be the people who are serving in the Mishkan. But because of Reuven's sin and other things, firstborn are being replaced, and the Leviim are taking over from the firstborn. So in other words, Hashem sanctified the firstborn for himself. We still have firstborn are sanctified. We still have a firstborn in certain circumstances who has a pidyon haben. He needs to be redeemed. And that's what goes on here. The firstborn are redeemed and replaced by the Leviim. So we count all the Leviim, and it comes out over the page, on page 742, 743, near the top of the page, all the counted Leviim, word of Hashem, were 22,000. The firstborn were counted, and it comes up that there were 22,273 in verse 43. There's 273 more firstborn than there were Leviim. And so we take the Leviim and the firstborn one for one, 22,000. A Levi replaces the firstborn. The other 273 had to bring a coin and were redeemed on that coin. In other words, they now no longer are eligible to serve in the Mishkan. Obviously, there were firstborns amongst the Leviim as well. That's taken into account. Moshe took this excess, the firstborn of the Klal Yisrael. He took the money, 1,365 sacred shekels, and he gave this money to Aaron and his sons according to what Hashem had said. Pidyon haben. That's the history of Pidyon haben at that point in time. A father of a child has to give 5 silver coins to the Kohen, who redeems the child. Basically says, do you want this kid or do you want the money, kind of thing. And the father, hopefully the father will say, I'll take the kid, you have the money. Okay, and then the Parsha ends with the family of Kahas, the three sons of Levi get special jobs. And Kaz is the first one here, and this is the work that they do, the most holy work in the Mishkan in terms of the parts that they will carry when the Mishkan is moving. And that ends the Parsha. So what I think we will do is leave it there for one moment and just very briefly discuss a connection between Bamidbar and Shavuos, which is coming up next week. Hopefully next week we will have a shir. It is a public holiday, but we'll figure out what we're going to do exactly. And hopefully then we'll discuss Shavuot in just a little bit more detail. But there is one mitzvah in the Torah which is incumbent on parents and grandparents to tell their children and grandchildren. I'll read it to you. It's something that is brought in the Siddur after Shachris. People say it every day. One of what's called the Sheish Zichronos, the 6 remembrances. So we have 6 things. Some Siddurim bring 10 remembrances, but generally Ashkenaz, we bring 6 things we need to remember. It quotes 6 different verses or 6 different paragraphs on what we need to remember. First one being, L'man tiskor et yom se'eschem Yisrael kol yemei chayecha. Remember that day that you departed Egypt, all the days of your life. That is a verse from Devarim, chapter 16, verse 3. We'll leave the second one out. The third one, remember what Amalek did to us. I won't read them all out. Again, these are all from, the first 5 of them are from Sefer Devarim. Remember what Amalek did to you when he attacked you. That's the reading that we do before Purim when we have Parshas Zachor, when we remember what Amalek did to us. What we need to remember there is that we were attacked when we were at our weakest, at our lowest point. And we need to protect ourselves and we need to wipe out that memory of Amalek. The fourth one, remember the golden calf. Remember how you angered Hashem in the wilderness. Don't forget how we angered Hashem. All it says is, Zachor al tishkach es Hashem, safta es Hashem elokecha b'midbar. Remember, don't forget how you angered Hashem in the wilderness. And that's talking about how we behaved before the golden calf when Moshe Rabbeinu hadn't come down when we thought he should have come down from Mount Sinai after 40 days. The third one being what we discussed in Sefer Devarim, the fifth one. Zachor es asher asa Hashem elokecha leMiriam b'derech b'tzeitz Mitzrayim. Remember what Hashem, your God, did to Miriam on the way when you departed Egypt. In other words, remember that Miriam spoke Lashon Hora about Moshe Rabbeinu. What she said we would not regard as negative speech. She was worried about her sister-in-law. We'll come back to that when we get to Parsha later on. This is brought in Devarim as Moshe is telling the Jewish people, remember all of these different things. In Sefer Bamidbar, the story is brought, but in Devarim it's saying, remember what Miriam said. Remember, don't speak Lashon Hora. Don't speak about other people. Good, bad, don't speak about people. And then the final one, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos l'kadshoy. Remember the Shabbos day to make it holy, to hallow it. One of the ways we do this is every single day we have a Shir Shel Yom, a chapter of Tehillim that we say, and we say, Hayom, today we said, Hayom Yom Sheni b'Shabbos. Today is the second day of Shabbos, in other words, of the week, of the Sabbath, and this is what the Leviim said in the Holy Temple. In fact, I mentioned Korach. This is the Tehillim of Korach, Shir Mizmor Livnei Korach, a psalm by the sons of Korach. That's how we know the sons of Korach weren't swallowed up in the hole in the ground with their father. They were able to do tshuva and come out. So Korach caused a division, machloikas, a split in the Jewish people. The second day of the week was the first time in history, in creation, that there could be a split. We now have day 1 and day 2. And so that's why one of the reasons why that chapter of Tehillim is brought on day 2. Okay, let's go back to the second of these remembrances. Rak hisham elecha ushmor nafshcha moed. Only beware and guard yourself carefully. Pen tishchach es advarim asher ro enecha, lest you forget these things your eyes have seen. Ufen yisaru me'ovavecha kol yomei chayecha, and lest you stray from your heart all the days of your life, v'adatam levanecha v'livnei banecha, that you should make them known to your children and to your children's children. What are you going to make known to your children and your grandchildren? Yom asher amarsa lifnei Hashem elokecha b'chorev, the day you stood before Hashem on Mount Sinai. So that's a mitzvah in the Torah incumbent upon grandparents. Told straight, remember what happened on Mount Sinai and tell it over to your children and to your grandchildren. So what happened on Mount Sinai? The Torah is the only book of any religion in the world that was not given to one person. Every other religion comes along and says, I had a vision. God came to me in a dream and told me that I need to tell you the following. There is nobody to prove this, nobody to verify it. It's just one charismatic, sometimes somewhat meshuggah person who is telling the world that she had this dream that God came to them. Most of them happened after prophecy ended. It says in the Gemara, it's brought that prophecy, the Chachamim davened that prophecy should end because the negative sides of it was so bad. The Avodah Zorah, they said, we need to crush this problem of idol worship. And Hashem said the world needs to be in balance. So if we take away idol worship, we've got to take away something positive, and he took away prophecy. A whole beautiful Gemara there. And so prophecy ended. It says that prophecy sits in certain people, who unfortunately who are severely disabled, mentally incapacitated. They have forms of prophecy. And there are ways that people have tapped into children particularly, any children, but in some children who are unfortunately can't communicate, non-verbal children, they're able to communicate certain prophecies through various different means, and people have used that. And prophecy sits in dogs, and prophecy sits in children, but it's not in something that sits in the world, in normal people today. It sits in deranged people. Let's use that term. More likely than not, Muhammad was fitted into that category. He lived around the year 700 or thereabouts, well after the Gemara was closed, well after prophecy ended in the second times in the second temple. Early in the second temple, this all happened. The Christian religion happened around about 2,000 years ago. Again, well after prophecy ended. By calling their leaders prophets, it's false because there was no prophecy in the world at that time. The Jewish people stood as a people. We said 3 million people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. Hashem came to us and called us, and he said, Anochi Hashem Lakecha, I'm Hashem your God. He didn't say, I'm Hashem your God who created heaven and earth. He said, I'm Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. Each of you were taken out of Egypt. You know and you can verify that that's who took you out of Egypt. I'm Hashem, I took you through the sea. Doesn't say it in the Ten Commandments, but 7 weeks before, he took us out of Egypt, took us through the sea, where we were able to see Hashem. It says the lowest person, the most uneducated maid in the Jewish people, saw a vision of Hashem when taken through the sea that was at a higher level of prophecy than the prophets themselves were able to see. They were at such a high elevated level. They saw Hashem. They couldn't handle this incredible spiritual experience. It says that the neshamas were thrown out of their bodies several kilometers away. And Hashem resuscitated them. And he said the second of the Aseret Adibros. And the same thing happened. And the people came to Moshe and they said, we can't handle this incredible connection to Hashem. We'll die. And Hashem has to resuscitate us all the time. Moshe, you go to Hashem. You get the rest of it for us. But we all experienced that incredible vision of Hashem telling us who he was and what creation's about, what our job in this world is as the Jewish people. It doesn't mean that we are, because we're the chosen people, that we are better than anybody else or that we are more elevated than anybody else. It's up to us to become elevated within ourselves and connect to Hashem. But the Jewish people being a light unto the nations is about us realizing who we are, where we've come from, and each of us what we have to do. And if we behave in a way that Hashem can look down at us and say, oh, that's the kind of person that I gave the Torah to on Mount Sinai. That's the kind of person who is teaching their children and their grandchildren what we experience. Because at the end of the day, we are one step, each generation is one step closer to the Sinai experience. I'll end with a quick story. I think I've told this story here before, but let's end with this story. There was a great rabbi flying business class in a plane. And he was sitting next to a very, very famous professor. And they're sitting there. You might chat a little bit, but this rabbi's grandchild kept coming to the front of the plane to talk to his grandfather, to bring him a drink, to offer him, check if he needs anything, throughout this long flight. And this professor eventually turns to the rabbi and he says to him, I don't understand this. The respect and honor your grandchild is giving you, my grandchildren don't even want to talk to me. I'm this old man, they don't care about me. And the rabbi turned to him and he said, it's a very, very simple explanation. You teach the theory of evolution. I teach the theory of Torah from Sinai, that Hashem created the world. To your grandchildren, you are 2 steps closer to a monkey. To my grandchildren, I'm 2 steps closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Mount Sinai, to that Sinai experience. My grandparents were at Mount Sinai and they passed that on they received that from their parents, their grandparents, all the way back. It's not that many generations back to Mount Sinai. It's probably somewhere between 80 and 90 generations. And we have an unbroken chain of tradition that we passed on exactly what happened at Mount Sinai. Our job is to pass it on to the next generations.